I'm delighted to be able to present what is a very topical topic for people of an interest in becoming a non-executive director. And the first thing I would say is that if you want to become a non-exec director, you need to plan this as carefully as you planned your executive career. It's no different, and it's just as difficult. And it's not a panacea to, a lot of easy money. You've got to work your way there. So I'm going to take you through some thoughts about what a non-exec director is, but also the 6 steps that I think you need to take to becoming a non-exec director. So just some background on myself, people who don't know me, and most of the world doesn't, by the way. So my background is in corporate governance. I've been doing this since about 2003 or 4, and I was doing a lot of consulting work in corporate governance, and I couldn't find a textbook on it. So as you would normally do, you just write it, and that became the bedrock for my books then. There was actually no market for the book at the time. So we got 2,500 copies printed, and we gave them away to various people for donations, and we raised 50,000 for a charity that supports young entrepreneurs. So my experience is based on, I suppose, about 100 or so evaluations of various types of organizations, be they financial institutions, state boards, charities, private companies, sports organizations, and so on. And they're each different. And out of that, I've published 2 books, the most recent 2, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and that book, actually, they published them both. So what's been interesting about this is that the last book I produced, which I'm not trying to sell here today, by the way, was called A Practical Guide to Becoming a Company Director. And the Institute of Chartered Accountants kindly hosted the book launch, but nobody comes to book launches for corporate governance. It's just not a great seller. But anyway, 300 people turned up to it, which we're amazed by. And hence this topic today, because we think this might be of interest to people. And I had a guy talking about his own experiences becoming a non-executive director. And he was the head of a very large financial institution here. And he did 2 of the best corporate governance courses at that time in the country. Cost him 30 grand or so. And he waited for the phone to ring. And to his disappointment, the phone never rang because he had no profile in the market. He was well known in a very small segment of it, but not that well known at all. So I'm trying to give you the benefit of his learning and what I know about this topic as well. So you can see on the right-hand side there the things I want to talk about. A little bit about the non-executive director. What is it? Assessing your potential, and also your market positioning, building a profile, harvesting your network, developing a plan, and my advice would be start today, not tomorrow. So what is a non-executive director? So some thoughts on this and things you need to be aware of before you kind of dive in here. It's not a panacea for everybody. And in terms of trying to match people with positions, it's not that well done. I would call it a cottage industry. Some of the search firms do it, and there's some kind of non-profits who do it well, but it's an area that is kind of forming. It's as a sector, and there's limited professional advice out there. So if you want to get advice, you need to go and talk to people who've been on boards, or people like me, or anybody like that. And what I also see is that you may not be lucky enough to even get a job description for the if you're asked to go for an NED position, because more often than not they don't exist. So we'll come back to due diligence of this and what you should ask for. That's definitely one of them. And the other thing I would say is that you've only one reputation. So if you decide to become an NED, you need to preserve that with your life, because you are the product. That is your lifeline, unless you have other source of income, which many may have because they've retired as an executive director. So those are just some kind of warning signals, I guess. So what is a non-exec director? So this can be confusing for some. Executive directors work in an organization and they are on the board. And non-executive, they're paid a fee, hopefully, if you're on a board of a non-profit or a charity or a sports organization, you won't be paid a fee. And indeed, in some state organizations in many countries in the world, you're not paid a fee because you're there for the glory of it. Beware of that, because that comes with challenges. So the things that I think a good non-exec brings to the table is that they're very good at the big picture, the strategy. The phrase I always use is they're good at looking at the sea and not the waves. COVID are the waves. Those waves will pass, but you need to be operate there. They challenge performance, they challenge director. And, you know, directors are called directors for a reason, because they are directing. They're not the managers. They are directors of the organization. They bring a really energetic and fresh perspective. And I always like to see fresh air in the boardroom. And non-execs can bring that with an external view. They may or may not bring in-depth industry knowledge. They might know something else. They might be great at fundraising. They may be good at M&A. They could be good at capital raising. They could be, you know, the best lawyer on the planet in relation to, I don't know, contracts for buying airplanes, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, you need to have, you know, huge integrity, be good at negotiating and collaborating with colleagues around the table, because it is a team game. So, and I think at the end of the day, and Fergal will talk this about the end of this program, we've a module at the end of this program, which is getting you ready to become an NED. And in essence, it gets you ready to be able to go into a boardroom. And there may be other people that have a lot more experience than you, but you will be able to ask those daft questions that you would be afraid to ask otherwise, with great confidence and with the appropriate mindset. Because good non-exec directors ask really good direct questions like, why are we doing it this way? Why does internal audit always do the following, whatever it might be? Why don't we, you know, manage risk in a different way? Or for instance, you know, in Norway, they're banning petrol stations from 2030. So if you're on a board that's anything to do with petrol stations in Norway, you just got to be, I suppose, aware of what those petrol stations might be doing in 30 years' time. Sorry, less than that, 10 years' time, because they won't be selling petrol. So some of the things that one needs to think about in becoming a non-exec director, one is that the non-exec director is really good at just smelling the air in the boardroom. And the phrase is nose in, fingers out, because if you put the fingers into the organization, you're trotting on executive management, what they do on a day-to-day basis. They are paid to do that. You're paid to be the director. You're paid for the oversight. You're paid for your experience. You're not paid to get operationally involved. What's the time commitment? It depends on the organization. It's hard to say, but anything from 6 to 10 meetings a year. And I always think 10 is far too many, maybe 6 to 8. But bear in mind, you know, you might be asked to go on committees, and if you're being paid for it, you get paid for that. And there's some good data which I'll share with you that Corn Ferry brought out last year on the information on what you get paid for being chair of various board committees. The fees will depend, of course, on the sector and the size of the organization. If they're PLC, clearly they're higher. If they're a small charity, well, there's no fee generally, and they can't pay fees. Private sector, and I think the range, certainly UK and Ireland, is somewhere between the kind of 10 or 15K to 90. I'm going to come back on fees towards the end of this discussion to give you some sense of how the fees vary by country to country. But the median rate for a non-exec director in Europe is about 70,000 sterling, to give you some sort of benchmark. So if you're lucky enough to hoover up 4 or 5 of these, you could probably get by on that kind of income. And indeed, in some countries, say in financial services sector, in Ireland in particular, you cannot have more than 5 non-executive directorships, because beyond that, you can't do your job. So just bear that in mind. So why would you bother becoming a non-exec director? It's a very responsible position. So you might have planned your executive career to end at a particular point in time. So if you're planning your non-exec career at kind of mid-50s or later, actually, I think that's too late. And I'll come back to that and tell you why. I mean, the experience you can get by sitting in different boards can be enormous and very uplifting. And, you know, good non-execs mix their career between paid positions and unpaid positions. It'll broaden your network. And, you know, if you've got a portfolio career, depending how you define that, this could fit into it because it might bring you more dependable income. But of course, it might only last 3 or 6 years and 9 with particular boards. It might bring status, then it may not. You need to be really careful what board you get involved with and the homework you need to do, because regardless of whether you're paid or unpaid, you've got exactly the same responsibilities. So be careful before you kind of say yes to anything. And I'll come back to some questions you need to ask potential people who want you to join their boards later. So I think the thing you need to do first is to assess your potential. So this could be illuminating for you. So I think you need to think about, depending when you're doing this, I met a young man last year, pre-COVID, and he was thinking about his non-executive career. And he was, I'd say, mid to late 30s. And he was thinking about, well, how do I get ready for this? And I was saying to him, well, try and get on the board of a well-known charity, because their governance will be good and you'll learn from it. Try not to go on the boards of organizations that have poor governance. You might learn from that too, but you might be putting your reputation at risk. So in terms of your skills, you know, what have you done in the past that might be worth something in the future? A lot of you've done in the past may not actually be worth anything from a non-exec director point of view. But look at your, you know, you might come from a marketing background, an ops background, HR, legal, finance, or whatever. What's probably as important is your experience. And hopefully, you know, when you sit down to figure out the SWOT on yourself, you haven't had 20 years of the same experience for the last 20 years, which is no good to anybody. You want 20 years of really different experience. So whether it's in a multinational or a private company, be it trading nationally, internationally, if you've experience of mergers and acquisitions or expanding to other countries, that's all really helpful. And if you won anything, I don't like the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award, that's helpful. Put that in your CV. So the question you need to ask yourself, what can I bring to the table as a non-exec director? So this SWOT thing you need to do by yourself initially, and take some time over, because you won't do it in an afternoon, because you'll think of things down the road that you've forgotten. Even I have forgotten, you know, what I did maybe 3 or 4 years ago that might be relevant here today. But, you know, think about things that would be of interest to people, because developing an NED CV is different, because you're targeting a different market. So when you've done that and you think it's pretty good, go and talk to, you know, friends you trust and friends who will be honest with you, and see what they think. Do they see that in you? And it's not just about the hard skills you might have, it's also about the soft skills. Because going forward now, there's a massive massive focus on culture of boards and the soft skills. So when I was talking last week about underperforming directors, performing NEDs really understand being in the moment and what's going on in an organization. And if you're sitting around the boardroom table at the moment, which you probably won't be, you'll be sitting around your dinner table, but you'll be at a board meeting and trying to understand what's going on in the minds of the other directors in the room, particularly the executive who are there full time, and trying to figure out, are they all okay? So a good non-exec director is good at empathy, they're good at communication, and they're good at just understanding, I suppose, the mental health and stress that their colleagues are under. So think about that SWOT. That's really, really important. And that will be a guiding light as to what you have today. So the SWOT is the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. And it's really the opportunity piece here that you should be saying, okay, I have this certain background, what can I do? And you know, the opportunities ahead will be different depending on when you start this, whether you're, you know, 35 or 45 or 55 or 60. And everybody brings something at a different age. But the more you prepare, the more opportunity you're likely to have in front of you. So no matter whether you're considering a PLC or, whoops, hold on here. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there. Yeah, you need to think about your positioning in the market. There's a great quote by Michael Porter. So it's actually not being better at what you do. It's just being differentiating yourself in the market. The NED market is very competitive at high levels. So if you're trying to get into banks or life assurance companies or PLCs, they're hard boards to get onto it. It might take some time before you can, but you're not suddenly going to be on one. You've got to develop a track record. So what you need to think about are the following. So you've done your assessment of yourself. Hopefully you got some help, talk to friends, maybe even talk to former directors who know you, who know what it's like in the boardroom, and they'll give you an honest opinion as to whether it's for you or not. It's unlikely you're going to be able to focus on 5 sectors. It's probably the one you've come from, or if you've worked in 2 or 3 sectors during life, they are the ones that you're most likely to be credible. It's very hard to move from being a potential NED on the board of an aviation company to a food retailer. It's a different skill set, the different sectors, and you need to know. Where you need to spend a lot of time is understanding what's going on in the industry you're targeting. From a regulatory point of view, from a trend point of view, who are the major players, what's going on. So, really good, ambitious NEDs are scanning the horizon constantly, reading the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Irish Times, whatever, and just being in tune, and also reading analyst reports of the sector. And you can sign up to those, whether it's from Goldman Sachs or wherever it might be. Get in tune with what's going on, and that'll help you position yourself there. Read research. I mean, if you look at the Corn Ferry, Google Corn Ferry after this, there's lots of good data in there. PwC, McKinsey, they all bring out information on sectors, and that should help you figure out where do I think I could position myself in the sector. So then you need to figure out from your assessment, your SWOT, what's going on in the sector you're after, what's your USP. And you need to be really clear about that. I mean, you might need to sort of, dodge this a little bit, depending on the opportunity, but you need to be really clear. So if you're talking to somebody and you're pitching yourself to, a headhunter, or pitching yourself to an organization itself, what can you bring to that? A, B, C, D. And that needs to be crystal clear. And you need evidence to back it up as to why you're going to be good at this sort of stuff. If you look, we're in kind of COVID at the moment. It'll pass through at some stage. I think a lot of organizations will be having a serious look at their strategy to see if the strategy they've had for the last X years is still fit for purpose. Can they continue doing what they're doing? Particularly if they're an organization that has no online presence. So a very obvious example is Marks and Spencer's. So they have 2 businesses, clothes and food. Their clothes business has no online presence. They're a dinosaur when it comes to this world, and they've got into delivering on the food side. So hopefully that might save them. But the clothes side might bring them down because they're not really fashionistas as an organization, and most people go there to buy underwear, not outerwear. You go to Zara for the outerwear, and they have fantastic online delivery. So think about the organization, think how you might position yourself to it. But organizations who are going through what I call a digital transformation, if you have those skills as an individual, you will be in demand. There's no doubt about that. Because the average age of a board is around 60 in PLCs in Europe. And there's not that many people at the age of 60 who have been through a digital transformation. So maybe you have at the age of 60, I don't know. But that's, I've seen people actually doing master's degrees now in sectors where they think they can sell themselves, and bolting on the governance and all the rest of the stuff. That's one thing you might consider. But digital transformation, that knowledge around the boardroom table is incredibly important as we move from kind of bricks and mortar businesses to more data driven and more IP driven. So you figured out your USP. Now you need to sort of build a market profile. And the one thing I would say here is that and you can follow this link afterwards. Professional networks, it's all about what's out there on the internet about you. So you need to really concentrate on that. So you have a place like Indeed, a big UK organization. I signed on to one of their emails. I was bombarded with opportunities to become director here and director there. And actually, I'd need to spend a couple of hours a day just filtering through all the stuff. Some were paid, some weren't paid. So my criteria probably weren't strict enough because it was a pain in the backside to have to go through all of these things. I've now turned that filter off because I actually have no interest in being an NED at the moment. So the internet. So what else do we need to think about here? Well, it is about social media. So you need to rewrite your CV, and that is an NED CV. It's not one where you're trying to get a job as a CFO, you're trying to get a job as a head of risk. It's a CV to become an NED. So in that, hopefully you can reflect where you've had governance responsibility. It could be as the head of risk in an organization, because that's a valuable skill to have. It could be you're the head of on a committee for risk in a charity. That's a valuable experience to have. But you need to put this up in LinkedIn, because that's, if anybody ever calls me, it's the first place I go within seconds, beginning of the phone call. Who is this guy or girl? What have they done? And you can find out pretty quickly if you're going to have a conversation that's worthwhile. So if I see some of the good with a good CV on LinkedIn, they phone me for a different reason, I'll probably have a longer call than a shorter one. So you need to edit your experience to reflect your target sectors, or if not a target sector, you're a financial guy. But I think actually at the end of the day, the sector is going to define, your sector experience will define where you can go legitimately. Get a decent photograph taken. There's so many bad photographs up on LinkedIn. You don't have to necessarily have a suit and tie, but just look smart and look fit if you can as well. It's even better. The key thing about social media, which a lot of people ignore, is that within your LinkedIn post, you must have the keywords that the recruiters or search companies are going to search for. So get some advice on that. And this is where your USP comes into play. Those keywords should be part of your USP. So if you've got 4 or 5 USPs, make sure they're reflected in your CV, and make sure that Google could pick them up, because that's what people are going to search if they want to find you on the internet. That is critical. And get help on that. Your kids or nieces or nephews or friends who are under a certain age can certainly help you to do that, but get help. So the next big thing here is your networks. We all have networks. Here's a pre-COVID conversation between various people at a meeting somewhere, and they're all talking about business cards and exchanging business cards and all the rest. And I've been to a lot of meetings, certainly last year, very few this year, where a lot of younger people did not have business cards because they don't carry them anymore. I do, but they could well not disappear, because they say, well, you get me on LinkedIn. That's generally the response. You just need to remember their name if you can. Hard at the end of a hard night of maybe drinking wine somewhere, but you got to write down the name somewhere or find some way of memorizing. And the big challenge now is we were all used to sort of networking by schmoozing, going to do's over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Now the challenge is networking virtually. And that is actually much more challenging. And you need to think about that. So one thing I would say to you all is it's not who you know that'll matter. It's actually who knows you, because we are in the age of visibility. We're not in the age of, well, they'll find me. They won't if you're not out there. And if you're not out there on LinkedIn or not being prominent out there, people will not find you, and you want them to find you. And I'm going to tell you some ways about how you might be able to do that. So this is probably the most important slide in the pack here. And of course, Fergal will tell you after how you can get this sort of stuff. So if you look at your networks from school, university, business school, whatever it might be, sporting organization, professional associations, trade bodies, you will have, probably hundreds, if not thousands of contacts there. So in terms of if you've got a target sector you want to go after, just supposing it's, I don't know, energy, renewable energy, and you have some form in that area, you think you can add value to a board because you've built or, a wind farm somewhere, go through your networks and filter those and be forensic in terms of who there is likely to be able to help you get a step on the way to where you want to get to. Who is in, I know, the UK Renewable Energy Association, or the same in Canada, or wherever it might be. Try and find people there. And you'll have to search too on LinkedIn and other places. So they're part of your asset base when it comes to being a non-exec director. The other thing you need to think about is your visibility. And this is where the hard work starts. You've done your SWOT, you've figured out your USP, you've gone through your Rolodex, as they used to call it recently. You need to be visible. So your LinkedIn profile is the first one. Then you need to think about blogs. Now, before you think about your blog, you need to figure out who are my target organizations, or what are they likely to want to read. So you've done your research, you've looked at the PwC stuff, the McKinsey stuff, and you're trying to see stuff that they worry about as organizations, or what skill sets they don't have that you as an NED can offer. So webinars, like this one here today. I only started doing webinars about 3 or 4 months ago, and it's really been interesting doing them. And what I have to learn first before I do them to be credible. But there's no reason why you, as potential NEDs, can't build a following doing this, and start small and build. And you need to talk about stuff that's relevant to your sector. If you can piggyback and say professional organization and offer to do a webinar for them on, well, I'm the best guy or girl in artificial intelligence in retailing. Use other platforms because they'll give you exposure to much greater numbers than you're going to do yourself, but that'll build your numbers too. So think about using other platforms to get your message out there, whatever it might be. Write a book. I've been writing books since 2004 or 5, and I'm still not an overnight success after 15 years, which is kind of worrying. So I'm waiting for that day to come. Have a point of view on things. So you might want to tweet, but be careful about what you tweet. Be adult, be responsible, but be insightful. And before you do that, perhaps look at what other business people or NEDs or whoever tweet and see what they say and how they say it. You need to be careful because you don't be seen to be representing a particular board you're on. You can't do that. That'll be inappropriate. But in your own right as an individual, as an expert in whatever it might be, you can do that. Speak at conferences, webinars, eventually become an influencer. So people are coming to you for advice on, well, what should I do? And that's a great place to be. I'm just looking at a poll, the second one here, and it says, how many of you have gotten jobs as a direct result of using social media sites? And 66% says, no, I haven't. 29% say I have, and 5% aren't sure. So there you go. There's plenty of scope here to improve those stats. So you're filtering your network, turning that into an asset is one thing, and then building your profile in the market. That's important too. That's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. Unless you're really lucky, but most of us aren't. It's all hard yards. So the plan. You need to think back. You've done your SWOT. You've done your network filtering. You've figured out your blogs for the while, but you need to put a time frame in this, and it won't happen overnight. So here's some thoughts for you. Not in terms of plan, but certain skills that are in demand. So this is what I see out in the market at the moment. So the future is less about physical assets. So you probably know that most of the top firms on the New York Stock Exchange are more to do with IP than physical assets. Digital transformation I spoke about, cybersecurity. So a lot of organizations now, their asset is data. The more you know about that, the better. You don't need to be Einstein when it comes to it. You might do a short course in it, but it enables you to ask of the executive, well, how are we fixed if our database is out of action for, 24 hours? Just imagine if an airline's passenger system was out of use for 24 hours, probably less critical at the moment, but probably was a year ago. But these sorts of things. We're also seeing now, because of the focus on climate change, and we can see it before us, boards wanting directors who are green ready. They understand that agenda. They understand climate change, and they understand sustainability. One organization I was involved with here as a client in Dublin called the Arts Council, and they have a 10 or 11 page board policy on diversity and inclusion and sustainability. It's brilliant and took an awful lot of effort. That just gives you some sense of the opportunity for a director to go on a board like that to see how you could add value. So if you're looking for opportunities for organizations, they don't have basic policies on sustainability or climate change, that could be part of your turf going forward. Become a qualified governance professional, probably not a bad thing to consider. There's over 8 million directors of organizations in the UK and Ireland. Most of those are unpaid because they work for charities or sports organizations. But there's less than 10,000 who have a qualification to become a director. Become a thought leader. You don't necessarily have to be an expert everywhere, but you're just incredibly insightful and ask great questions. Like a QC or a senior counsel, they ask great questions. And some of the attributes that I've seen in an article reading last night preparing for this was, you should be modest. Don't dominate a boardroom. That's not a good place to be. A low ego, but you're okay with ambiguity. What does that mean? We're all looking into a dark hole of the future as to what it holds, but you need to be okay with that. Good non-execs can join the dots of ambiguity and try to see a way forward for organizations. Poor NEDs can't see that. So I'm not saying there's masters in ambiguity out there, but the more you can actually cope with ambiguity and the uncertainty of it, the more value you will add to a board. So in terms of the objectives, set out your objectives. There could be, I want to be on 3 boards by here, I want to next year's, but you should set objectives en route in terms of, well, I want to get on a leading charity board by this, or a sports board or whatever. And I want to get certain experience there. I want to be head of the audit committee. So being head of a committee is good. That gives you kind of experience that puts your feet against the fire. You got your USP. You probably should trial that in a few places if you can. Further education, need to consider that. Whether it's in cybersecurity or digital transformation or doing governance, that's up to you to decide what gap you need to plug. And have a networking plan. Now I could spend an hour on this, but I can't, we don't have the time. But one of the people who's on the Governance Advisory Council Networking Institute, he is an expert in networking, and he runs a thing called the Networking Institute. That's just worth going into to see what's there. Because networking in a physical world versus a virtual world is quite different, and you need to understand and know that expertise. So another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're open for questions. Okay, start now. You can start when you want to start. If I look at the stats for the Corn Ferry report they did on non-execs last year in Europe, the average age of a female non-exec in Norway is 54. So that person on a PLC in Norway at the age of 54, so that person must have been thinking about that role, I would say 10 years beforehand, the age of 45. The median age for all directors in Europe and PLCs is around 60. And the Italians also are very good at bringing young women onto boards as well. The average age there is about 54. So it's never too early to start. So one question I'm always asked, which I don't have time to cover, this will be the subject of another webinar, is what questions or what information do I need to ask before I say yes to an organization? The first one is talk to the former directors and executives in that organization to see what it feels like, what the culture is like, what the DNA is like. Do a media search using social media. Is there anything out there about them? If they're a regulated organization, go into the regulatory bodies, see if they've had any regulatory breaches. Never a good sign. Look at their accounts and so on. But we'll cover that again in another webinar. So that's all I want to say. I hope that's been helpful, and obviously happy to take any questions.
I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, 6 Steps in Becoming a Paid Non-Executive. I would just like to remind everyone about our Diploma in Corporate Governance. It's commencing on the 15th of September. If you'd like to attend, please feel free to contact me. And there's a few places available. We'll also be running it in November if you feel the 15th is too soon. This, again, what David has just covered there, being a paid non-executive director, and module 10 of the diploma course, we look at that in more in-depth detail. So by the end of the module 10 on that course, you'll be NED ready, and you'll be fully competent and capable of going into that role going forward. So it's very beneficial. While thinking of your next question for David, I might start you off with a question I've been asked frequently by delegates looking to attend the diploma. What is the most important matter to find out before you say yes to an NED appointment, David?
Well, this might sound like a daft question, but you got to make sure the place is solvent. Because if you join the board of a company that's not solvent, well, then you're in all sorts of trouble. So I can see some of the questions on chat coming through here. One question about if you're paid in equity, is that a conflict of interest? I think it depends on the organization. So I think organizations need to have a policy in that. USP, that's been covered here. It's your unique selling proposition. Here's another question. What particular industries might benefit from having somebody from a senior medical physician background? Well, I would think pharmaceutical, private hospitals, research organizations, and there's probably lots there too. Corn Ferry, it's a global headhunting company. They have a presence now in Dublin. Yeah, some responses here. Yeah, Kingsley Aikens here, that's the guy at the Networking Institute. Somebody's recommending tools like HubSpot, Buffer, presumably you can all see this, yeah. Here's Tony McPoland, a very experienced non-exec director, and he's also delivering one of our modules on the course, which is called the Company Director, and his experience will be 3 and 22 months between initial conversation and eventual appointment, so there you go. So reputation here, yeah, and actually a big issue in boards is the dominant individual. Certainly with a case here, for people who aren't familiar with the Football Association of Ireland, they had a director there, the CEO, who was a dominant individual, and he pretty much controlled the board and brought the organization to its knees. Ageism, that's been asked to me. I think there's less of a focus on that these days, because I think there's a lot of really smart people around the place that, you know, I'd be happy to have on a board, like Warren Buffett, 88, bring him in the morning. So you just need to make sure that no matter what age they are, they're adding value. I don't have an issue with age, provided they're adding value. Some organizations may have limits on it, but I don't think that's a good idea, because that's discriminatory in my view. But you know, you can get some really wise sages, male and female, of a certain age, and they can add massive value to the board. So I'm going through more of these here. So I have a vast amount of government experience in the further education sector. In what ways would you suggest I utilize this in the private sector? Well, there's lots of organizations in the private sector are trying to educate people, like LinkedIn. There's a lot of e-learning companies around the place who would value your experience. So you need to sort of think outside the box here, I think. A lot of private education companies, a lot of them online. Talk to those. how do firms typically source NEDs? Well, they'll source, the bigger ones will go out and use, I think, search companies. They very seldom will go and headhunt somebody without going through due process now, because that's just not the way you should do it. So it's the big accounting companies, it's the law firms, it's the Corn Ferries, it's the Hydrick and Struggles and the like, PwCs. There are volunteer organizations, not-for-profits like Board Match in Dublin, a good organization. I haven't used them, I have no direct experience, but what I know, they do a good job. Here's a guy, I'm a 35-year-old lecturer, trainer specialized in digital transformation. There you go. Could my youth hold me back, or should I wait until I'm in my 40s to become an NED? What I would say to you, you begin to plan to become an NED now and figure out your plan and how you might get there. Bob Semple here, who's on our government advisory board as well. Risk reward for directors, because you want to make sure that, okay, you get a paid position, but are you getting paid for what you do? You might well end up on a board and be giving a lot more hours than you planned, not only on the board, but on a committee as well. The slides are available later, and so is a recording of this presentation. Yeah, Ria said that. Where's the best place to find vacancies advertised? I don't see in the newspapers these days. I think you need to be approaching the search companies, but don't approach them until you have a very good handle on the sort of organizations you want to join, and you've done all the things I've suggested here. If you just turn up, you might know somebody there. They might be very polite, but if you're not ready for the market, they won't be ready for you. That's the bottom line. You need, because you're a product, they want to generate a fee out of you. But if they see you're not ready, well then they won't be that enthusiastic. CVs for non-exec roles. What I would do if I was you, I would try and find out the names of really good non-exec directors and look at their LinkedIn CVs and see what they look like. And that'd be a good example. I see Tony McPoland here. He probably would be the worst person to look at. But think of people in your own country who are kind of top-notch NEDs and what their CVs might look like. They might be so good they might need one on LinkedIn. Who knows? I just don't know. Here's Kingsley looking for a board member experience in M&A. Well, I think you need to go to the accounting companies, maybe the law firms who might be operating this space. They might be able to give you some help there. So I'll try to scroll through all of these and give you some response. I see some of them are already been answered by your colleagues. Hope that's helpful. So happy to take any other questions kind of on a face-to-face basis. Well, confidentiality here from Nasser. Well, confidentiality, you have a code of conduct, and if people break that, they should be fired. Simple as that on the board. So people have to sign up to this code of conduct when they join. And it's a pretty serious thing. I was on a board of a school in Dublin. I was the parents' representative. I was on it for 6 years, and the chair at the end of each meeting said, the following things are confidential until we decide otherwise, and the following you can tell the parents. And it was really clear to me about what we discussed, because the parents are always wondering what went on in school board meetings. Okay.
David, I suppose what hasn't been addressed would be who should not consider a career as an NED?
Great question. I think an NED is not an easy career. It's tough because you're on show most of the time. I think you may not have the skills or experience to be a credible one. So you need to test the market quickly to see if you have what it takes in the tank to do that. And if you're not getting anywhere quite quickly, the market's telling you it's not for you. Or you may not have the inner confidence or the mindset to be around a boardroom table challenging others, but also recognize you're going to challenge yourself. So if that's an issue for you, well, wait some time and try and build it, or say it's not for you. How long should a term of office last? Well, that should be in your governance handbook. It should be 3 years, renewable for another 3, and maybe another 3. The various governance codes for different sectors will also spell that out what's good practice, but generally 9 would be at the outside. And Derek Bell here is saying board induction process. Yeah, absolutely. I was doing the evaluation of board 6, 7 years ago. There was a really bright young lady on it. And she'd been on it for 2 years, and she still didn't really understand how the place worked because it was so complex, because the board induction was poor, and there was poor engagement by the chair and support from the board in helping her. I can't believe I've addressed every question people might have here. There is another one. What's the best way to propose NED structure of a company that doesn't have one? You identified a missing aspect in the company and you're suggesting they make you an NED for that aspect. Well, depending on the board, so supposing it's a private company and they want to bring in some independence on it, I think you need to be clear what skills and experience you want to bring on board. And I think it's always easier to attract 2 NEDs rather than 1, otherwise it's very lonely. But really have a role mapped out for them. So supposing you might want them as head of, say, the finance committee if you have one, or audit and risk, that might be a particular role for them, but be really clear in what you're looking for. Navigating the political camps on the board, they're always there. I think a good chair keeps in touch with the members around the table, and you know, you don't want political camps, you don't want cliques, because that can be difficult. And I've certainly seen that in some boards in Ireland. I'm sure it happens everywhere. But a good chair makes sure cliques don't occur, and if they do, they need to have a conversation about them, because it's not healthy. What people don't want is, and I've seen it happen, your board meetings happening outside the board meetings, but with that clique, and that's the road to ruin. That's not good. Niall Quinn, I'll send you on my my contact details there. From Tom Furlong, just to affirm a point you made, the last board search project I completed, both finalists identified through the LinkedIn profiles. There you go. That's affirmation from Tom Furlong, who I only got in contact with this morning. Is the UK market more mature? Probably yes, because there's greater opportunity there. I think we're still learning here. I mean, you know, there are some PLCs here who have not been well run in the past, and there's still question marks over some of them here. I mean, a lot of the investment community in London in particular still sees Dublin as the Wild West when it comes to governance. So we've a bit to go on that front to make sure that we do better. Hopefully we're not unique in the world. Is solid knowledge in finance prerequisite? I think it's very helpful. You might have a finance committee that would help, but you know, if you're a board member and you're relying on the only finance guy around the table to give you a view on the finances, well, then you're putting you and the board at risk. You need a couple of people to understand that. And if you don't, that should be part of ongoing board development for you and or others. The point made by Derek Bell here is using subcommittees as an apprenticeship is a really good one. So you have a chance to go on a board committee without necessarily going on the board itself, so it's lower risk. And then if you like them and they like you, and you go through selection process, you might end up on the board. So that's a good way to, it's done a lot in the non-profit sector. Here's, do you have advice when he's looking at fund companies and moving into Dublin? Well, you know, you just need to go and fish where the fish swim. So for fund management, I think you're probably looking at who's auditing them and who are the legal advisors, and try and get to talk to them. That's what I'd be doing. Or with the various, I suppose, trade bodies associated with them as well. And there are one or two in Dublin. I'd go and talk to them. I think there's about 300 directors, NEDs in Dublin on fund companies, roughly. And there's 150 of those who are members of, I think it's the Financial Fund Directors Association. So that's probably somewhere you might want to go to. Noel Ford, I think, is associated with that. You get him on LinkedIn. He's also delivering one of our modules in the winter. He's looking at risk. So is the question, Nasser, are the evaluation for an NED similar to employees? No, it's not. It's a very different process. Bear in mind that employees have a long-term contract, NEDs don't. And boards will carry out two types of evaluations, one for the board as a whole. And if you're on a PLC or a private company, there will be individual director evaluations, and that will determine whether you get a new term or not. Chartered director worth doing, it says here. I think anybody who wants to go on a board, having a qualification will help enormously, and there's plenty of them out there. Or legal firms, yeah, good place to target to become an NED. It depends on what type of organizations you're going after, so do your homework first, and you look at the partners that are servicing certain sectors. Energy position for a small family-owned business as a starting point, pros and cons. Well, you need to get the support of the people around the boardroom table there. They need to know what a good NED will bring to the party. They need to know they're going to be asked challenging questions, and are they up for that? And they need to know they'll have to pay them. Those are some of the pros and cons. CBI accreditation here. Well, that's vital for anybody who wants to go on a board in a financial institution in Dublin. So you've got to go through probity checks to make sure you pass that. And I assume that's the same for most people who want to become NEDs in financial institutions, in regulated financial institutions around the world. Will Brexit having happened, will there be any implications for UK-based NEDs sitting on boards in EU countries? Poof. I don't know is the answer, but I'm sure somebody else does. Sorry, I just don't know. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. Okay, there's a response for you. Thank you. Okay, we have 4 minutes left, and then I'm having my lunch. Okay, I think that seems to be it. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. We have another webinar next week that's on the building blocks of corporate governance. So tune in next week if you want, and we look forward to helping you. If you go to our website, you'll find all the webinars we're running for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Fergal, any parting words there?
Yeah, just thanks for everyone for attending again. As David mentioned there, the 5 building blocks of corporate governance is scheduled for the 15th of September. So it would be great if you could attend if you haven't already done so to register your interest. Also on the 15th, we're kicking off our diploma in corporate governance. I see there's a lot of people there looking for, academic qualifications, and we're certainly providing that now. We've very informative diploma there that's going to be running quite soon, and again in November, with 10 different modules delivered by 10 different lecturers who are industry experts as well as the academic qualifications they possess. So it'd be great if you could if you could attend, and if you have any interest or any colleagues that are interested, please don't hesitate to contact me. That's great. Thanks for all for attending again, and again, like David, enjoy your lunches.
Okay, thanks a million, folks.
Thanks.
Talk next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.